Penguin Island by Anatole, France. Book 4. Modern Times. Trinco. Book 4, Chapter 1. Mother Roquine. Aegidius Aucupis, the Erasmus of the Penguins, was not mistaken. His age was an age of free inquiry. But that great man mistook the elegances of the humanists for softness of manners. And he did not foresee the effects that the awakening of intelligence would have amongst the Penguins. It brought about the religious Reformation. Catholics massacred Protestants, and Protestants massacred Catholics. Such were the first results of liberty of thought. The Catholics prevailed in Penguinia, but the spirit of inquiry had penetrated among them without their knowing it. They joined reason to faith, and claimed that religion had been divested of the superstitious practices that dishonoured it, just as in later days the booths that the cobblers, hucksters, and dealers in old clothes had built against the walls of the cathedrals were cleared away. The word legend, which at first indicated what the faithful ought to read, soon suggested the idea of pious fables and childish tales. The saints had to suffer from this state of mind. An obscure canon called Princetot, a very austere and crabbed man, designated so great a number of them as not worthy of having their days observed that he was surnamed the Exposer of the Saints. He did not think, for instance, that if St. Margaret's prayer were applied as a poultice to a woman in travail, that the pains of childbirth would be softened. Even the venerable patron saint of Penguinia did not escape his rigid criticism. This is what he says of her in his Antiquities of Alca. Nothing is more uncertain than the history or even the existence of Saint Orberosia. An ancient anonymous annalist, a monk of Dombes, relates that a woman called Orberosia was possessed by the devil in a cavern, where, even down to his own days, the little boys and girls of the village used to play at a sort of game representing the devil and the fair Orberosia. He adds that this woman became the concubine of a horrible dragon who ravaged the country. Such a statement is hardly credible, but the history of Orberosia, as it has been related, seems hardly more worthy of belief. The life of that saint by the Abbot Simplicissimus is 300 years later than the pretended events which it relates, and that author shows himself excessively credulous and devoid of all critical faculty. Suspicion attacked even the supernatural origin of the Penguins. The historian Ovidius Capito went so far as to deny the miracle of their transformation. He thus begins his Annals of Penguinia. A dense obscurity envelops this history, and it would be no exaggeration to say that it is a tissue of puerile fables and popular tales. The Penguins claim that they are descended from birds who were baptized by Saint Maël, and whom God changed into men at the intercession of that glorious apostle. They hold that, situated at first in the frozen ocean, their island, floating like Delos, was brought to anchor in these heaven-favoured seas, of which it is today the queen. I conclude that this myth is a reminiscence of the ancient migrations of the Penguins. In the following century, which was that of the philosophers, scepticism became still more acute. No further evidence of it is needed than the following celebrated passage from The Moral Essay. Arriving we know not from whence, for indeed their origins are not very clear, and successively invaded and conquered by 4 or 5 peoples from the north, south, east, and west, miscegenated, interbred, amalgamated, and commingled, the Penguins boast of the purity of their race, and with justice, for they have become a pure race, the mixture of all mankind, red, black, yellow, and white, round-headed and long-headed, has formed in the course of ages a fairly homogeneous human family, and one which is recognizable by certain features due to a community of life and customs. This idea that they belong to the best race in the world, and that they are its finest family, inspires them with noble pride, indomitable courage, and a hatred for the human race. The life of a people is but a succession of miseries, crimes, and follies. This is true of the Penguin nation as of all other nations. Save for this exception, its history is admirable from beginning to end. The two classic ages of the Penguins are too well known for me to lay stress upon them. But what has not been sufficiently noticed is the way in which the rationalist theologians, such as Canon Princeteau, called into existence the unbelievers of the succeeding age. The former employed their reason to destroy what did not seem to them essential to their religion. They only left untouched the most rigid article of faith. Their intellectual successors, being taught by them how to make use of science and reason, employed them against whatever beliefs remained. Thus rational theology engendered natural philosophy. That is why, if I may turn from the Penguins of former days to the sovereign pontiff, who today governs the universal Church, we cannot admire too greatly the wisdom of Pope Pius X in condemning the study of exegesis as contrary to revealed truth, fatal to sound theological doctrine, and deadly to the faith. Those clerics who maintain the rights of science in opposition to him are pernicious doctors and pestilent teachers, and the faithful who approve of them are lacking in either mental or moral ballast. At the end of the age of philosophers, the ancient kingdom of Penguinia was utterly destroyed. The king put to death, the privileges of the nobles abolished, and a republic proclaimed in the midst of public misfortunes, and while a terrible war was raging. The assembly which then governed Penguinia ordered all the metal articles contained in the churches to be melted down. The patriots even desecrated the tombs of the kings. It is said that when the tomb of Draco the Great was opened, that king presented an appearance as black as ebony and so majestic that those who profaned his corpse fled in terror. According to other accounts, these churlish men insulted him by putting a pipe in his mouth and derisively offering him a glass of wine. On the 17th day of the month of Mayflowers, the shrine of Saint Orberosia, which had for 500 years been exposed to the veneration of the faithful in the church of St. Maël, was transported into the town hall and submitted to the examination of a jury of experts appointed by the municipality. It was made of gilded copper in shape like the nave of a church, entirely covered with enamels and decorated with precious stones, which latter were perceived to be false. The chapter in its foresight had removed the rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and great balls of rock crystal, and had substituted pieces of glass in their place. It contained only a little dust and a piece of old linen, which were thrown into a great fire that had been lighted on the Place de Grève to burn the relics of the saints. The people danced around it, singing patriotic songs. From the threshold of their booth, which leant against the town hall, a man called Rouquin and his wife were watching this group of madmen. Rouquin clipped dogs and gelded cats. He also frequented the inns. His wife was a rag picker and a bawd, but she had plenty of shrewdness. "You see, Rouquin," said she to her man, "they are committing a sacrilege. They will repent of it."
"You know nothing about it, wife,"
answered Rouquin.
"They have become philosophers, and when one is once a philosopher, he is a philosopher forever."
"I tell you, Rouquin, that sooner or later they will regret what they are doing today. They ill-treat the saints because they have not helped them enough, but for all that the quails won't fall ready cooked into their mouths, they will soon find themselves as badly off as before, and when they have put out their tongues for enough, they will become pious again. Sooner than people think, the day will come when Penguinia will again begin to honour her blessed patron. Rouquin, it would be a good thing, in readiness for that day, if we kept a handful of ashes and some rags and bones in an old pot in our lodgings. We will say that they are the relics of Saint Orberosia, and that we have saved them from the flames at the peril of our lives. I'm greatly mistaken if we don't get honour and profit out of them. That good action might be worth a place from the curé to sell tapers and hire chairs in the chapel of Saint Orberosia."
On that same day Mother Rouquin took home with her a little ashes and some bones, and put them in an old jam-pot in her cupboard. End of Book 4, Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Trinco. The sovereign nation had taken possession of the lands of the nobility and clergy to sell them at a low price to the middle classes and the peasants. The middle classes and the peasants thought that the revolution was a good thing for acquiring lands and a bad one for retaining them. The legislators of the Republic made terrible laws for the defence of property, and decreed death to anyone who should propose a division of wealth, but that did not avail the Republic. The peasants who had become proprietors bethought themselves that, though it had made them rich, the Republic had nevertheless caused a disturbance to wealth, and they desired a system more respectful of private property and more capable of assuring the permanence of the new institutions. They had not long to wait. The Republic, like Agrippina, bore her destroyer in her bosom. Having great wars to carry on, it created military forces, and these were destined both to save it and to destroy it. Its legislators thought they could restrain their generals by the fear of punishment, but if they sometimes cut off the heads of unlucky soldiers, they could not do the same to the fortunate soldiers who obtained over it the advantages of having saved its existence. In the enthusiasm of victory, the renovated Penguins delivered themselves up to a dragon more terrible than that of their fables, who, like a stork amongst frogs, devoured them for 14 years with his insatiable beak. Half a century after the reign of the new dragon, a young Maharaja of Malay called Jambi, desirous like the Scythian Anacharsis of instructing himself by travel, visited Penguinia and wrote an interesting account of his travels. I transcribe the first page of his account. Account of the travels of young Jambi in Penguinia. After a voyage of 90 days, I landed at the vast and deserted port of the Penguins and travelled over untilled fields to their ruined capital. Surrounded by ramparts and full of barracks and arsenals, it had a martial though desolate appearance. Feeble and crippled men wandered proudly through the streets, wearing old uniforms and carrying rusty weapons. "What do you want?" I was rudely asked at the gate of the city by a soldier whose moustaches pointed to the skies. "Sir," I answered, "I come as an inquirer to visit this island." "It is not an island," replied the soldier. "What?" I exclaimed. "Penguin Island is not an island?" "No, sir, it is an insula. It was formerly called an island, but for a century it has been decreed that it shall bear the name of insula. It is the only insula in the whole universe. Have you a passport?" "Here it is." "Go and get it signed at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs." A lame guide who conducted me came to a pause in a vast square. "The insula," said he, "has given birth, as you know, to Trinco, the greatest genius of the universe, whose statue you see before you. That obelisk standing to your right commemorates Trinco's birth. The column that rises to your left has Trinco crowned with a diadem upon its summit. You see here the triumphal arch dedicated to the glory of Trinco and his family." "What extraordinary feat has Trinco performed?" I asked. "War." "That is nothing extraordinary. We Malayans make war constantly." "That may be, but Trinco is the greatest warrior of all countries and all times. There has never existed a greater conqueror than he. As you anchored in our port you saw to the east a volcanic island called Ampelophoria, shaped like a cone, and of small size but renowned for its wines. And to the west a larger island, which rises to the sky a long range of sharp teeth. For this reason it is called the Dog's Jaws. It is rich in copper mines. We possessed both before Trinco's reign, and they were the boundaries of our empire. Trinco extended the Penguin dominion over the archipelago of the Turquoises and the Green Continent, subdued the gloomy Porpoises, and planted his flag amid the icebergs of the Pole and on the burning sands of the African deserts. He raised troops in all the countries he conquered, and when his armies marched past in the wake of our own light infantry, our island grenadiers, our hussars, our dragoons, our artillery, and our engineers, there were to be seen yellow soldiers looking in their blue armour like crayfish standing on their tails, red men with parrots' plumes tattooed with solar and phallic emblems and with quivers of poisoned arrows resounding on their backs, naked blacks armed only with their teeth and nails, pygmies riding on cranes, gorillas carrying trunks of trees and led by an old ape who wore upon his hairy breast the cross of the Legion of Honour, and all those troops, led to Trinco's banner by the most ardent patriotism, flew on from victory to victory, and in 30 years of war Trinco conquered half the known world. "What?" cried I.
You possess half of the world? Trinco conquered it for us, and Trinco lost it to us. As great in his defeats as in his victories, he surrendered all that he had conquered. He even allowed those 2 islands we possessed before his time, Ampelophoria and the Dog's Jaws, to be taken from us. He left Penguinia impoverished and depopulated. The flower of the insula perished in his wars. At the time of his fall there were left in our country none but the hunchbacks and cripples from whom we are descended. But he gave us glory.
He made you pay dearly for it.
Glory never costs too much,
replied my guide.
End of Book 4, Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Journey of Dr. Obnubile. After a succession of amazing vicissitudes, the memory of which is in great part lost by the wrongs of time and the bad style of historians, the Penguins established the government of the Penguins by themselves. They elected a diet or assembly, and invested it with the privilege of naming the head of state. The latter, chosen from among the simple Penguins, wore no formidable monster's crest upon his head, and exercised no absolute authority over the people. He was himself subject to the laws of the nation. He was not given the title of king, and no ordinal number followed his name. He bore such names as Patour, Janvion, Trafaldin, Coquenhot, and Bredouille. These magistrates did not make war. They were not suited for that. The new state received the name of public thing, or republic. Its partisans were called republicanists, or republicans. They were also named thingmongers and sometimes scamps, but this latter name was taken in ill part. The Penguin democracy did not itself govern. It obeyed a financial oligarchy, which formed opinion by means of the newspapers, and held in its hands the representatives, the ministers, and the president. It controlled the finances of the republic, and directed the foreign affairs of the country as if it were possessed of sovereign power. Empires and kingdoms in those days kept up enormous fleets. Penguinia, compelled to do as they did, sank under the pressure of her armaments. Everybody deplored or pretended to deplore so grievous a necessity. However, the rich and those engaged in business or affairs submitted to it with a good heart, through a spirit of patriotism, and because they counted on the soldiers and sailors to defend their goods at home and to acquire markets and territories abroad. The great manufacturers encouraged the making of cannons and ships through a zeal for the national defence, and in order to obtain orders. Among the citizens of middle rank and of the liberal professions some resigned themselves to this state of affairs without complaining, believing that it would last forever. Others waited impatiently for its end and thought they might be able to lead the powers to a simultaneous disarmament. The illustrious Professor Obnubile belonged to this latter class. "War," said he, "is a barbarity to which the progress of civilization will put an end. The great democracies are pacific and will soon impose their will upon the aristocrats." Professor Obnubile, who had for 60 years led a solitary and retired life in his laboratory, whither external noises did not penetrate, resolved to observe the spirit of the peoples for himself. He began his studies with the greatest of all democracies and set sail for New Atlantis. After a voyage of 15 days his steamer entered during the night the harbour of Titanport, where thousands of ships were anchored. An iron bridge thrown across the water and shining with lights stretched between 2 piers so far apart that Professor Obnubile imagined he was sailing on the seas of Saturn, and that he saw the marvellous ring which girds the planet of the old man. And this immense conduit bore upon it more than a quarter of the wealth of the world. The learned Penguin, having disembarked, was waited on by automatons in a hotel 48 stories high. Then he took the great railway that led to Gigantopolis, the capital of New Atlantis. In the train there were restaurants, gaming rooms, athletic arenas, telegraphic, commercial and financial offices, a Protestant church, and the printing office of a great newspaper, which latter the doctor was unable to read, as he did not know the language of the New Atlantans. The train passed along the banks of great rivers, through manufacturing cities which concealed the sky with the smoke from their chimneys, towns black in the day, towns red at night, full of noise by day and full of noise also by night. Here, thought the doctor, is a people far too much engaged in industry and trade to make war. I am already certain that the new Atlantans pursue a policy of peace, for it is an axiom admitted by all economists that peace without and peace within are necessary for the progress of commerce and industry. As he surveyed Gigantopolis, he was confirmed in this opinion. People went through the streets so swiftly propelled by hurry that they knocked down all who were in their way. Obnubile was thrown down several times, but soon succeeded in learning how to demean himself better. After an hour's walking he himself knocked down an Atlantan. Having reached a great square, he saw the portico of a palace in the classic style, whose Corinthian columns reared their capitals of arborescent acanthus 70 metres above the stylobate. As he stood with his head thrown back, admiring the building, a man of modest appearance approached him and said in Penguin,
I see by your dress that you are from Penguinia. I know your language. I am a sworn interpreter. This is the Parliament Palace. At the present moment the representatives of the states are in deliberation. Would you like to be present at the sitting?
The doctor was brought into the hall and cast his looks upon the crowd of legislators, who were sitting on cane chairs with their feet upon their desks. The president arose, and in the midst of general inattention, muttered rather than spoke the following formulas, which the interpreter immediately translated to the doctor. The war for the opening of the Mongol markets being ended to the satisfaction of the states, I propose that the accounts be laid before the Finance Committee. Is there any opposition? The proposal is carried. The war for the opening of the markets of Third Zealand being ended to the satisfaction of the states, I propose that the accounts be laid before the Finance Committee. Is there any opposition? The proposal is carried. Have I heard aright? Asked Professor Obnubile. What? You an industrial people and engaged in all these wars? Certainly, answered the interpreter. These are industrial wars. Peoples who have neither commerce nor industry are not obliged to make war. But a business people is forced to adopt a policy of conquest. The number of wars necessarily increases with our productive activity. As soon as one of our industries fails to find a market for its products, a war is necessary to open new outlets. It is in this way we have had a coal war, a copper war, and a cotton war. In Third Zealand we have killed 2/3 of the inhabitants in order to compel the remainder to buy our umbrellas and braces. At that moment a fat man who was sitting in the middle of the assembly ascended the tribune. I claim, said he, a war against the Emerald Republic, which insolently contends with our pigs for the hegemony of hams and sauces in all the markets of the universe. Who is that legislator? Asked Dr. Obnubile. He is a pig merchant. Is there any opposition? Said the president. I put the proposition to the vote. The war against the Emerald Republic was voted with uplifted hands by a very large majority. What? Said Obnubile to the interpreter. You have voted a war with that rapidity and that indifference? Oh, it is an unimportant war which will hardly cost $8 million. And men? The men are included in the $8 million. Then Dr. Obnubile bent his head in bitter reflection. Since wealth and civilization admit of as many causes of wars as poverty and barbarism, since the folly and wickedness of men are incurable, there remains but one good action to be done. The wise man will collect enough dynamite to blow up this planet. When its fragments fly through space, an imperceptible amelioration will be accomplished in the universe, and a satisfaction will be given to the universal conscience. Moreover, this universal conscience does not exist. End of chapter 3, and the end of book 4.